As we get started today, I want you to think about your first job. Was it in retail, a restaurant, a warehouse? My first job was at Taco Bell in the mall in Parma, Ohio. I would show up and work a whopping 8 or 10 hours a week, dressed in my brown polyester uniform with pants that were about 7 inches too short for me. Usually I was placed on the grill to fry up meat for the steak tacos. And I say meat because I'm not really sure it was steak. To this day, I have a hard time eating at Taco Bell. Now, right up front, I want to acknowledge that talking about work can be challenging for some of us. For various reasons, some people find themselves unemployed or on disability or out of the workforce for understandable reasons. But for most of us, that first job launched us into what will become 5 or 6 or even 7 decades of work. Most of us are going to spend most of our lives working. Today, I want you to think about the way you work. The truth is, there are different ways to work. See if you can relate to any of these. First, you could be a workaholic. This is the worker who is always on the clock. It's common for them to put in 60 or 70 or more hours per week. The workaholic can't stop checking email or sending texts to their coworkers at all hours. And they have a hard time turning off work, sometimes even on vacation. They feel a constant drive to perform, to achieve, to be productive. Perhaps on the opposite side of the spectrum is the quiet quitter. Have you heard that term? It emerged during the pandemic to describe workers who stay in their jobs but just do the bare minimum required. This worker doesn't put in any more time or effort or enthusiasm than is absolutely necessary. A 2023 Gallup poll found that at least 50% of the United States workforce is made up of quiet quitters. So if someone else is watching this with you, the odds say that one of you is a quiet quitter. I'd like to suggest that there's one more way to work that we can identify, perhaps a way that overlaps in places with the other two. We'll call this the work quaker. This is the worker who typically changes jobs every 2.5 years. They hope that the next change, the next job, the next transition will somehow make life different. In a recent survey, 3/4 of Americans say they will be looking for new work during this next year. That's fascinating. I wonder, do you see yourself in any of these? My guess is most of us will at one time or another during our vocational journey. But are any of them the wise way to work? What if there is a wise way that can lead to a greater sense of fulfillment no matter what job you have or where you clock in to work? Well, today, we're wrapping up our series, The Wise Way, which is based on the book of Proverbs. Proverbs is meant to be a book of wisdom. And the core argument of Proverbs is this. Essentially, life is about 2 different ways, the foolish way and the wise way. And Proverbs has a lot to say about how to be wise in our work. Now, let me remind you right up front that work is a good thing. We were made to work. All the way back in the Genesis 2 account of creation, we read, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to take care of it." We were made to work. Work came before the fall. Work is a good thing. However, just like everything else, human sin distorted and disrupted work, which has led to many foolish ways to work. In fact, I'm going to argue that the 3 ways to work we just discussed are all foolish ways. Now, maybe that seems harsh, but deep down, I think you know it's true. These 3 ways don't lead to the fulfillment we long for in our work. So, what is the wise way? Well, the first thing we learn from the book of Proverbs is that wise work is patient. Proverbs teaches us those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies have no sense. The picture here is of a farmer who does the slow, consistent work of planting and cultivating a crop so that one day in the future, there will be an abundant harvest. But a lot of us don't want to work like that, do we? We want rewards and results now. We live in a world of instant gratification. Many of us have grown up where that is all we've ever known. You want to buy something? Go on Amazon and order it, and it arrives the next day. You want to watch a TV show? Log on and you can binge watch all 7 seasons. You want to go on a date? Just swipe right. Instant gratification. We want it all right now. And we can bring this impulse for instant gratification into our work. I wonder if this impulse, at least in part, is what drives the workaholic. With an insatiable desire, an insatiable appetite for success, achievement, and recognition, the workaholic chases a fantasy that they can burn the candle at both ends without doing any damage to their relationships or their health or their soul. I've tried this before in my life, and believe me, it is a foolish way to live. Wise work is patient. It's not in a hurry. The wise worker invests time and effort into the work they do, but trusts God to bring about the harvest. I think it's especially important for people who are just starting out in their careers to take hold of this wisdom. One of the things I love about so many of the people I meet in younger generations is that you want your work to be meaningful. You want it to be fulfilling. And yet so many of you are discouraged because you aren't moving up in the organization as quickly as you want or aren't seeing the fruit in what you're doing. I saw a video in which Simon Sinek, the best-selling author and business leader, said, I keep meeting these wonderful, fantastic, idealist, hardworking, smart kids, and they just graduated school. They're in their entry-level jobs, and I sit down with them and ask, how's it going? And they say, I think I'm going to quit. And I'm like, why? And they say, well, I'm not making an impact. And I have to remind them, you've been here 8 months. Impact takes time. Wise work is patient. If you are faithful with what is before you, you never know where it might lead you. In fact, maybe you've never heard the story of a carpenter who used to do woodwork for some of the big shots in Hollywood. He did good, commendable work. In fact, Star Wars creator George Lucas met him when he was installing a wooden door in Francis Ford Coppola's home. And Lucas was impressed with the carpenter's skills, and so he hired him to build a door in his casting offices. Only what happened is that Lucas decided that not only was this carpenter the right man for that job, he was the best person for a part Lucas was trying to cast in his movie. And that is how the carpenter, Harrison Ford, became Han Solo. Now listen, I am not saying that if you are patient, you're going to become a Hollywood A-lister. But I am saying that wise work often leads to unexpected opportunities. As we long for meaningful work and fulfilling careers, let's remember that wise work is patient. Trust the process, continue to grow, and wait for the right moments. Like the patient farmer and the faithful carpenter, our efforts will bear fruit in due time. Wise work is patient. But that's not all the wisdom that Proverbs has for us about work. The writer of Proverbs also instructs us that wise work is diligent. In Proverbs 10, we read, lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. One of the most important encouragements that Proverbs gives around work is to be diligent. That is to be focused, to work hard and improve the skills you bring to the work you're doing. In his book, Outliers, author Malcolm Gladwell proposes that it takes 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert in your field. 10,000 hours. That's a lot of hard work, a lot of commitment, a lot of diligence. And this concept is built on research that found that innate talent alone is not enough to reach exceptional levels of success. Instead, extensive practice and experience are crucial. Diligent hands bring wealth, and not just material success, but the joy of being good at something, the satisfaction of making a meaningful contribution through your work. To be frank, this kind of diligence is the exact opposite of quiet quitting. As I mentioned earlier, there's a growing trend in the United States where at least 50% of the workforce consists of people who stay in their jobs, but do the bare minimum required, not putting in more time or effort or enthusiasm than is absolutely necessary. The writer of Proverbs calls this working with lazy hands, and it leads to poverty. And again, that poverty is not just financial, it's emotional poverty, psychological poverty, vocational poverty, where you feel no passion for your job and no purpose in your work. The wise way is to be diligent, trusting that God can bring something meaningful and beautiful out of your commitment and dedication. Want an example of what this diligence looks like? Well, the writer of Proverbs gives you one. He writes, "Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler. Yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep?" The wise way to work is to be diligent, like an ant. I mean, sure, maybe it's a little insulting to be compared to an insect, but that might be part of the point. An ant doesn't have a boss, yet it works the wise way. An ant is an example of a trustworthy worker, one who works diligently without needing supervision. When our team was working on this message, Yorkville Community Pastor Doug Vance told us that when he was in college, he and a bunch of his buddies decided to launch a summer painting business in their local town. And all summer long, they painted everything from houses to businesses to barns and anything that needed to be painted. And their initial idea was only to paint that one summer, but word spread about their work. And they ended up running that business for a couple more years. And their hard work opened opportunities and helped all of them pay for their college tuition. Their diligence paid off by literally paying their school bills. Friends, because the stats say that 50% of us struggle with this, let me challenge us. Our faithfulness and trustworthiness as Christ followers should be seen through our work. It's a way we can bless those we work with and those we work for. Echoing the wisdom of Proverbs, the Apostle Paul challenges us. He says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving." Wise work is diligent. We can honor God by being diligent in our work. Wise work is patient. Wise work is diligent, which leads to the third wise way to work. Wise work is content. Proverbs says, "A sluggard's appetite is never filled, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied." Now, while there are some extraordinary cases where a person steps right into their dream job, enjoys a lifetime of vocational bliss, many of us, while we might not hate our work, find that it isn't as satisfying as we would have hoped. And I think it's one of the reasons why 3/4 of Americans say they'll be looking for new work during this year. We become work Quakers, always looking to the next thing to give us satisfaction. I recently came across the story of a guy named Andy Dunn, who sold his clothing line to Walmart for $310 million. And Mr. Dunn, who's now 44, says he spent years strategizing and fantasizing about such a sale, but he now says it was a mirage. Building the company brought him more happiness than the eventual payout. Dunn said, "From the outside, people think, 'Oh my, that's amazing.' But I learned that those are just illusions." Now, I know what you're thinking. That $310 million would satisfy me. But that just goes to show that you and I are susceptible to the same illusion that fooled Andy Dunn. On a much smaller scale, we think that the contentment we're after lies just ahead in that next thing, that next promotion, that next job. And of course, there may be times when changing jobs is the wise thing to do. But if you constantly find yourself discontent with the job you have, thinking that fulfillment will be found in your next role or your next company or your next endeavor, perhaps it's time to pause and think more deeply about how you are trying to find satisfaction. You see, for many of us, the problem is that we think our jobs are about ourselves. We think the purpose of our jobs is to make us happy and fulfill our own desires. So when we don't feel that satisfaction in our current role, we're ready to jump ship and move on to the next thing. But what if God has you exactly where He wants you to be right now? What if He has purposes for you in this season that you're in? Have you ever considered that your job is not about your job, but about your mission? It's about the people you are around. Your purpose might not be about the job you're actually doing. It might be about how God wants you to bless the people you are working with. If you see in yourself a work Quaker who is never satisfied and always seeking fulfillment in the next thing, maybe what God wants to teach you is how to find purpose and contentment in your job right now. One of my favorite passages in Proverbs is this one from the 3rd chapter. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Will you trust God that He has you where He has you right now for a purpose? Now, of course, if He wants to move you somewhere else, He can make that clear and direct your path. But the wise way to work is to learn to be content where He has you and look for the purposes He has for you in the season you are currently in. I'd like to wrap this up today by telling you about a man who lived in Paris, France in the 17th century named Nicholas Herman. Now, Nicholas grew up in poverty. When he became old enough to do so, he joined the French army simply because it would provide him with food and clothing. A few years later, Nicholas felt compelled by God to join the local monastery. Now, he was not an educated man, and therefore he was not able to do the study necessary to become a minister. So for the majority of his life, he worked as a cook and dishwasher in the basement of the monastery. He was a good worker, patient, diligent, and content in what God had given him to do. Near the end of his life, he was promoted to sandal repairman, a job that involved mending and repairing the other monks' and ministers' shoes. Now, perhaps some of you have heard of him. He took on the religious name Lawrence of the Resurrection and became known simply as Brother Lawrence. And despite his lowly position and lack of education, Brother Lawrence became one of the most sought-after brothers in the monastery. He was known for his personal character and integrity and had a reputation as a man filled with the Spirit of God. People came from far and wide to seek out his wisdom. Now, Brother Lawrence did not develop this reputation by accident. He had a method that he dedicated himself to during all those years of doing tedious manual labor. While he worked, Brother Lawrence constantly thought about the love of God and the character of God. He worked in constant prayer, both prayers of talking to God and prayers of silently listening for God in his work. Lawrence said, "The time of work does not, with me, differ from the time of worship. And in the noise and clatter of my kitchen, even while several people are at the same time calling out for different things, I commune with God in as great a tranquility as if I were upon my knees in prayer in the holiest cathedral of worship." After his death, Brother Lawrence's method became known as practicing the presence of God. And a book of the same name was compiled about his method. You should check it out. This book is one of the most important contributions we have on spiritual development. And it came from a simple, uneducated, hardworking dishwasher and sandal repairman in Paris. There is a wise way to work. Wise work is patient. Wise work is diligent. Wise work is content. And as we learn to work in the wise way, we might just find that every client, every spreadsheet, every shovel of dirt, every lesson plan, every sales call is a moment that can be holy unto God.